was just a hint, seemingly harmless, and he almost ignored it. Business called him out of town, and as usual, he left Susan, his wife, a detailed itinerary. Likewise, she gave him a detailed account of her schedule. After so many years together, this had become automatic. Burley, a friendly, cheerful man with a constant smile on his face, was a troubleshooting specialist and negotiator at his company. Business trips like this one, though not frequent, still occurred a few times a year. This week-long trip away from home was supposed to last until Saturday. He planned to fly out of Los Angeles on Saturday evening at 9:15. Since he was due to arrive in Seattle after midnight, he insisted that Susan not meet him at the Seattle-Tacoma airport. He planned to return home by bus from the airport, which would drop him at his door in Bellevue at 1:30 in the early hours of Sunday. Then, on Thursday morning, the deal unexpectedly went through. The people he was negotiating with signed the contract by 11 a.m. and left to deal with a crisis at one of their enterprises on the East Coast. Early that morning, he flew into Los Angeles and changed his tickets. By 1:45 p.m., he was already on the plane during the flight. He called home from the onboard phone and informed Susan that he would be home in the afternoon, but of course she was at work, so he rummaged through his briefcase, found her work number, and tried to reach her at the office. Jensen. Sharon and Anderson, how may I help you? Her secretary greeted him. Oh, where's Jennifer? Burr asked. Jennifer was Susan's personal secretary. Usually his calls went directly to her desk. Mrs. Conroy's secretary will not be in the office today or tomorrow. How can I assist? You came the cheerful reply from the receptionist. You okay? Then can I speak with Mrs. Conroy? Mrs. Conroy, you. Who may I say is calling? Came the slightly nervous reply from the receptionist. This is her husband, please connect me. He requested, after a brief pause. Oh, Mrs. Conroy is currently busy, and I'm not sure when she'll be available. May I leave her a message? Burr hesitated for a moment. No, I'll talk to her at home this evening. Just let her know that I called, and he hung up the phone. Something about that call didn't seem right, but it took him another half hour to figure out exactly what it was last night. Susan had told him over the phone that she would be in the office all day today. Nevertheless, it was possible she was working on a legal case or with a client, and she couldn't be disturbed. The main issue was Jennifer's absence. Susan had made it a rule that Jennifer worked the same hours as she did. Burley remembered that Jennifer only left the office when Susan was working in exceptional cases. The plane landed in Seattle on time and Early was home by 6:35 p.m. Susan wasn't home and the house was dark, which was surprising. His wife almost always returned home by 6:35 p.m. Early unpacked, throwing his dirty laundry into the hamper before changing clothes. When Susan hadn't come home by 8 o'clock, he made himself a grilled cheese sandwich for dinner. Then he settled in front of the TV waiting for Susan. Since Susan still hadn't returned from work, he began to worry had she been in an accident, but if something like that had happened, someone would have called home or at least left a message. He was too anxious, worried about Susan, to sit still, and found himself pacing the room. He dialed her cell phone number but got a message that the number was unavailable. Probably, he thought, because the phone was turned off. I wonder why she needed to turn it off. The hint that something was wrong turned into a burning coal of anxiety by 9:20. When his own cell phone rang, picking it up, he heard Susan's voice. I was starting to worry that something went wrong, were her first words. Her voice sounded concerned as usual. I called the hotel after dinner and they told me you had checked out. Is everything okay with you? Yes, the plans just changed a little, he replied. Where are you? I'm at home. I just finished cleaning the kitchen. It's so lonely here this evening. Will you be home on Sunday as planned? Yes, I'll be home all day. Sunday. No problem. This morning we moved our negotiations to the company's headquarters. You can reach me on my cell, he answered, his eyes fixed on the dark, empty kitchen. There was no sign of his wife and the sink was piled with dishes from his homemade cooking. Did anything unusual happen today? I tried to reach you at the office this afternoon. Oh well, no, nothing special. I must have been on the phone with John Sticker at that time. This week he's been helping me sort out what happened with the Melrose account. I owe him a lot for that, she said, with a tone that seemed to carry a hidden meaning. Early couldn't grasp. Darling, after I managed to prevent any issues with that account, it looks like I'm going to get a partnership. Mr. Jensen practically promised me. Susan was overjoyed. Isn't that great? Of course, dear, we should celebrate. I'm sorry I wasn't there tonight to start the celebration right away. Don't worry about it. My love. We can celebrate on Sunday. When you get home, don't be late. I really miss you. It'll be lonely in this big bed tonight without you." After a few more minutes of talking about household matters, the call ended. Early sat reflecting on the lies Susan had just fed him. His stomach churned, and he tasted bitterness in his mouth until tonight. He believed that his marriage and their love were solid. It was something he had never doubted. Now he wasn't so sure. Early went to bed late, tossing and turning for several hours before finally falling asleep alone in the large bed, the same bed Susan had complained about being lonely, and he woke up at 7 o'clock, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, trying to plan his day by 9 o'clock. He realized that Susan wasn't coming home. He called her office when the receptionist answered. Instead of Jennifer, he simply asked if he could speak with Mrs. Conroy. When she told him that Mrs. Conroy was unavailable, he thanked her, saying it wasn't an urgent matter and that he would call back on Monday morning. "Oh, that should be wonderful. We expect Mrs. Conroy at the office by 9 o'clock on Monday. You can call her." Then came the friendly reply. After extracting the information from his wife's work, Files Early got into their SUV. They had bought the dark green Explorer for towing their camping trailer and rarely used it, except for trips to the Cascade Mountains or when towing the trailer. It was a vehicle none of their acquaintances knew about. Leaving the Mercedes in the garage, he drove to Susan's office in Bellevue, slowly driving through the parking lot. He confirmed that Susan's gray BMW wasn't there with a sinking heart. He set off to find the address from her files, the home of John Stoner. He found it in a wooded area of the prestigious Medina neighborhood. The property was enclosed by an 8-foot-high red brick fence and surrounded by the dense shadows of tall fir trees. Slowly driving by, he saw Susan's BMW parked near the garage where it didn't block the circular driveway. His vision suddenly blurred and he pulled over to the side of the road until he could calm down and wipe his eyes. Early drove to Bellevue and stopped for breakfast. It was 1130 when he sat down at the table and ordered Belgian waffles and tea. His stomach was too upset to drink coffee, and he wasn't sure if he could even manage to eat the waffle. He ate slowly, forcing himself to swallow each bite, and finally finished the meal, paid, and left the restaurant an hour later. Driving slowly, he returned to the road past Stickner's house. Susan's car was still there. After more than an hour of aimless driving, he passed by Stickner's house again. His wife's car was still there that he drove home in turmoil. Reflecting on what was left of his marriage and the life he once enjoyed, he wondered if he would ever smile again. The rest of the day he spent idly. He couldn't bring himself to cook, and from time to time satisfied his hunger with light snacks, fruit juices, and cola. The only interruption was another call from Susan to his cell phone at 945. Just as he was getting ready to go to bed, she again complained about how big and lonely their bed felt without him. Brig just chuckled, trying not to sound gloomy, and said that she really had no idea how lonely such a big bed could be. Susan was puzzled and asked what he meant. He brushed off the comment, agreeing that she must feel very, very lonely lying in bed alone. He told her that he loved her more than life itself before hanging up the phone. Eventually, at midnight, he forced himself to go to bed. His mind was racing. Did she ever love him at all? Was she trying to punish him for something? No, it wasn't about him. It was about her. What was wrong? What more did she need? Could he even provide it? What could he do to fix this? He tossed and turned for another night, waking up restless. At 8 a.m., Early sat in the living room with the curtains drawn and the lights off. When he heard Susan's BMW pull into the garage, it was almost 10 o'clock. A moment later, she came in through the door, leading from the garage to the kitchen, carrying a small overnight bag from where he sat in his large dark leather armchair. He watched her walk in. She was wearing a plaid skirt and a bright red sleeveless blouse. The top 2 buttons of her silk blouse were undone. She looked fresh and relaxed as she walked through the kitchen. Her tickless and a necklace, a gift from him on their 3rd anniversary, shimmer on her slender neck. Halfway through, she stopped, staring at the mess in the kitchen sink. Early hadn't bothered to wash the dishes after breakfast or even load the dirty glasses from the night before into the dishwasher. Susan also noticed the kettle with water warming on the stove. Susan glanced around cautiously, slowly, warily. She walked through the kitchen, where light barely seeped in through the drawn curtains. She stopped in the dining room, eyeing the drawn curtains over the sliding glass doors that led to the patio. She scanned every nook and cranny of the room before entering, tossing her overnight bag onto a chair in the dining room. She crept into the living room toward the fireplace. Picking up the poker, she turned back to face the room. It was then that Early, sitting quietly in the chair, raised his cup to his lips to take a sip of tea, drawing her attention to his ghostly presence. "Oh my God, Early, you scared me to death. When did you get home?" Susan's voice trembled. Early let the silence stretch. Only a few minutes passed, but it felt like much longer before he finally responded. His voice, usually so lively and vibrant, sounded hollow. A couple of days. Susan's knees seemed to buckle and she stepped back, nearly collapsing into the chair opposite her husband. A look of shock was frozen on her face. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call? Where have you been staying?" Taking another sip of tea, Burr replied, in a voice devoid of any emotion. "I did call. I called Thursday afternoon. You weren't home and you weren't at the office. Jennifer wasn't there either." Letting the silence stretch again, he took another sip of tea. "I was sitting here in my chair when you called. I spent the night in that big, lonely bed you told me about outside under the warm sun." A car drove by. Two neighbor kids began to argue loudly, and one of their dogs started barking noisily in the living room where all the curtains and blinds were drawn. There was a half light. The only sounds were Susan's muffled sobs. Taking another sip, Burley continued in the same lifeless, expressionless voice. "For some reason, I don't think the bed where you spent the last 2 nights was that lonely. Don't you want to tell me about it? Susan? Can you explain to me what happened?" Susan was now crying openly, her head shaking from side to side as she covered her face with her hands. "Early, I love you. This has nothing to do with you or us. Please try to understand. I felt like I had to do it. It has nothing to do with us or my love for you. This is nonsense. Susan, how can what you did to betray me have nothing to do with us? I felt like I had to do it. I was trying to repay John for what he did for me. It has nothing to do with how I feel about you. It's not connected to my love for you at all." Early sat silently watching his wife and sipping tea until he finally got up to refill his cup from the kitchen. He asked Susan if she wanted anything. She shook her head negatively without looking at him. She also didn't watch as he returned to his seat. "Well, wife, tell me, why did you feel like you owed Sticker? And why did that make you break your wedding vows to me?" Suddenly he had a thought. "Did he blackmail you before helping with the Melrose case?" "No, oh no, he didn't do anything like that. He is a very noble man. What he did was only because he wanted to help me, and he knew that I wasn't responsible for the mess. He would never have asked for anything like that. He expected nothing in return. So since he didn't ask, he was too noble even to suggest that you break your vow. Why did you volunteer? Did I hear that right? What am I missing this? All sounds so vulgar. It wasn't like that at all. He deserved it. I keep telling you that this had nothing to do with you, me or us. Did I do something wrong? Did some issue with me lead to this?" Susan almost shouted. "And no, I keep telling you this is not your fault. I had to find some way to thank him for what he did for me. When he helped me with Melrose, he was doing it for both you and me. His help will benefit us both. Everything I did not for myself. It was for him, and it had nothing to do with my love for you." After a brief pause, he slowly asked, "Pained, since you're so upset that my description of your date sounds tasteless and vile, does that mean it was wonderful for you?" Silence stretched again before Early broke it. "Do you remember, Susan, how I always told you how I swore that I belonged to you, and you always told me that you belonged to me? Many times you told me that you were entirely mine, usually without prompting. Do you remember how strongly I believed that we belonged to each other? Do you remember that Early's voice was even devoid of any expression? But Susan heard a tremor in his words. Early, yes, I truly belong to you. This has nothing to do with you or us." "Oh, Susan, how can you say one thing and then another so contradictorily? Do you not see the contradiction? You gave me what was most important to me, what I was most proud of in the world, yourself. And now you've given that to another man. And as I sit here listening, I'm starting to understand that you don't value your sexuality very much. You gave it to a man who, by your own words, didn't even ask for it. Listen, I'm starting to think that you had to beg him to accept it, and then you tell me that I have nothing to do with this." He added, in a quiet, hopeless voice, "But that doesn't mean anything, Early. I'm still here. Nothing has changed in me. I love you with all my heart. I'm yours," Susan sobbed. "Susan, everything we're going through changes us. You just came back after spending 2 nights in bed with another man." Here Early had to pause as his voice trembled. "You were intimate with another man, doing things that should only be shared with someone you love." Sobbing, he asked, "How many nights did you spend with him?" "Susan, was it just 2 nights? How many more were there?" After a long pause, as he managed to regain control of his emotions, he continued. Now his voice sounded impassive again. And may it help me, Susan. I can't help but wonder how many other men deserve to be rewarded with what belonged only to me. You tell me that you're mine, and then you inadvertently reveal yourself. Susan's body shook with sobs as she shook her head. Denying Earl's words, she seemed to shrink. Her shoulders slumped, her elbows rested on her knees, her face was covered by her hands, and her hair fell across her face. Long moments stretched on as the man sat silently lost in thought while his wife shrank in her chair opposite him. The room was filled with half-light, and the only sounds were those coming from the outside world, a world the neighbors enjoyed. A quiet, sunny room. There was no sound except for Susan's sobs until the clock on the mantelpiece began to softly chime noon. Susan, I don't know where we're heading. I swear I love you just as much now as I did on Sunday when I left for Los Angeles. But I don't know where we stand. You keep telling me that your betrayal has nothing to do with me. You don't understand what you've done. My trust in you is gone, and I don't know how I can get it back or what you can do to earn it again. After a moment of silence, Burley continued. If you're suggesting that I go and cheat on you to balance the scales, then it's over between us. First of all, if you care so little about my fidelity, it shows how little you value me. Secondly, 2 wrongs don't make a right. 2 wrongs are twice as bad as 1. He slowly got up from the chair, placed the empty teacup on the mantel, and headed to the dining room. There, he pulled back the curtains to look out at their bright, impeccably clean backyard. He spoke in a tone that made her strain to hear. Susan, I want to shake you so hard that your teeth rattle. I've never wanted to hurt a woman before, especially not my wife. My love, yes, and it would be a very bad idea for me to meet John Sticker right now. Despite your hints that it was you who seduced him. Susan let out a quiet sound, perhaps denying that she had seduced. John Burr continued. You said it wasn't his idea just to throw in another little problem now, that he's tasted your fruit, which he got without any effort on his part. Isn't he expecting those fruits to be available to him? Whatever you explain to him, he's convinced that you're easy to get along with. Susan's protest was interrupted as he went on. Maybe he doesn't think you're available to anyone else, but he knows you're available to him. For him, it's easy. Over time, he will lose respect for you and stop valuing you. Wife, if you and I want to somehow save this marriage, we will have to face this head on hour by hour, day by day, week by week. In this house, as we try to resume a communication, taking a deep breath, he continued, almost whispering. I don't know if that's possible. I know that today we can't make any decisions. It may take months or even years before we can truly feel comfortable with each other again. Tonight I will sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow we will replace our double bed with a full-size one for each of us one way or another. If we work hard, maybe we can manage this. If we both want to work out right now, I doubt you can. For now, this is the best I can do. Looking around the living room, he felt as if he were staring into a dark cave after their sunlit backyard. I'm willing to try in the coming months. We can talk about what marriage means to each of us. Maybe we can manage to keep this. Susan. I love you. That he pushed aside the glass doors leading to the courtyard and stepped outside. As he closed the door, he heard his wife sobbing. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of English Epic. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.